He was a homeless veteran who won a junk storage bin. What his dog smelled inside changed their fate. The desert cold settled over Flagstaff like a sheet of steel that night, the kind that crept through clothing and bone without mercy. Eli Turner felt it the way only someone who had spent too many winters outside could feel it. The concrete under the overpass radiated the day's leftover chill, and his breath came out in pale ribbons. Beside him, Ranger lay with his head on his paws, eyes open, always watching. Even in rest, the German shepherd held himself like a soldier. The auction yard across the street buzzed with generators and cheap floodlights. People came and went, bidders bundled in jackets, chasing the small thrill of finding treasure in someone else's forgotten storage unit. Eli wasn't there for a thrill. He was there because $20 could either buy him a week of canned food or one chance at something better. He chose the chance. Ranger lifted his head before the loudspeaker even announced Unit 27B. His ears twitched towards the sound, then toward Eli, the unspoken question in his eyes. Eli gave a faint smile, rubbing the dog's neck. "This is the one. Not sure why, just feels right." The bidding was short. No one wanted a unit that smelled faintly of mildew and looked like it held nothing but cracked plastic crates and the sagging frame of an old treadmill. Eli raised his number once. $20. No one counted. The auctioneer slammed his clipboard shut. Sold. Eli had seen plenty of storage bins in his years drifting up and down Arizona, but something about this one scratched at the edges of his memory. Maybe it was the way the air felt colder near the metal door. Maybe it was nothing. Ranger certainly thought it was something. The shepherd stood rigid in front of the roll-up door, nostrils flaring, one paw slightly lifted as if bracing himself. When Eli unlocked the latch and rolled the door up, the smell hit first. Dry dust, old insulation, the stale tang of wood that had been trapped too long without sunlight. Ranger stepped forward, slow, tail down, his gaze locked on the back corner of the unit. Eli clicked on his flashlight. Broken TV frame, rusted desk chair, a box of warped mystery novels. Nothing worth $20. Nothing worth Ranger's posture tightening like a bowstring. "Easy, boy," Eli whispered. Ranger didn't blink. His entire body leaned toward the left wall, nose working the air. Eli followed the dog's stare. Something was off. A tall wooden crate leaned against the wall, but it wasn't sitting flush. The base didn't touch the concrete evenly. He knelt and ran his fingers along the edge. The crate shifted. Ranger's growl started low, vibrating the air between them. Not aggressive. A warning. Eli braced his boots and dragged the crate aside. Behind it, the beam of his flashlight landed on a flat, perfectly cut outline in the drywall. A false panel. He exhaled once, slow and controlled. Back in Afghanistan, hidden doors meant traps or secrets. Here, in a forgotten bin in northern Arizona, they shouldn't have meant anything. And yet the same instinct rose up in him, sharp and familiar. He pressed his palms to the panel. It moved inward with a soft click. Behind it was an object the size of a toolbox, but heavier, carved from dark metal with reinforced corners. Dust clung to it in a thick coat, undisturbed for decades. On the front, a locking bar with 3 distinct latches. Not standard. Not something a casual owner would ever own. Ranger approached it, not with curiosity but with the tense reverence of a dog encountering something that didn't belong in the world he knew. He sniffed once, then pulled back abruptly, letting out a soft, high whine that Eli had only heard in combat zones. The sound he made when explosives were near. The sound that said danger, but also truth. Eli crouched beside the strongbox. His fingers hovered over the metal for a moment. The cold that radiated from it wasn't from the winter air. It was the cold of something sealed away, something that had waited too long. Looks like you picked the right unit after all, he murmured. But Ranger wasn't looking at the box anymore. His head snapped toward the open doorway. His muscles tightened. He issued a single, low bark. Short, controlled. The kind of bark that said someone else was out there. Eli froze. From the yard beyond the floodlights came the faint crunch of gravel under a slow, deliberate footstep. Not a bidder, not a worker, someone watching. Ranger moved in front of Eli, body square, stance wide, gaze pinned on the darkness outside the unit as the desert wind carried in a scent that only a trained shepherd could pass. The chapter closed on a single realization tightening in Eli's gut. They weren't alone. The warehouse sat at the edge of Flagstaff's industrial district, a long-forgotten building with broken windows and a sagging corrugated roof. To most people, it looked like a place where rust went to die. To Eli Turner, it was shelter. Thin, unreliable shelter, but better than the open desert. He slipped through the side entrance, the metal door groaning softly as Ranger pushed in beside him. The shepherd shook the cold from his coat, then circled the dark interior with practiced precision. Every night, Ranger cleared the space the same way he had cleared compounds overseas. Tonight, his movements were sharper. His nose stayed low, sweeping the air. His ears flicked toward sounds Eli couldn't hear. "Easy," Eli whispered, but he felt the tension too. It crawled along his spine the same way it had back in Helmand Province, on nights when the wind carried the wrong scent and the silence felt rehearsed. Eli set the metal strongbox on an old workbench. The surface wobbled but held. He studied the latches. 3-point locking bar. Reinforced edges. The kind of thing used to store evidence or money, not family keepsakes. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it behind a false panel in a cheap storage unit. Whoever they were, they hadn't wanted it found. Ranger approached the bench, nose dipping toward the box but never touching it. His hackles lifted, just slightly, like static waiting to arc. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. But his body spoke loud enough. Something in here isn't right. Eli knew the code to that look. He'd trusted it in firefights when Ranger was still assigned to a joint K-9 unit. The dog had saved lives then. He trusted him now. "All right, buddy," Eli murmured. "Let's find out what's inside." He pulled a thin metal pick from his pocket. Most homeless vets carried odd tools. His were remnants of military training. He slid the pick under the bar, found the tension point, and applied pressure. The lock resisted, then gave a stubborn metallic click. Second latch, third, another push. The internal bar shifted. Ranger stiffened. Not at the lock, at the room. The shepherd's head whipped toward the far corner. His entire posture changed, muscles tightening, tail low, eyes narrowed into hunter focus. A sound rumbled in his chest, low and controlled. A warning. Eli froze. The building was supposed to be empty. Even the squatters avoided this place. There was nothing worth stealing. No reason for anyone to be here, unless someone had followed them from the auction yard. "It's fine," Eli told himself. "Probably just the security patrol outside. Maybe a fox got inside again. Nothing more." But the breath he drew felt thin. The instinct he had spent years trying to ignore woke like a muscle remembering old work. No, something is off. He pushed the box open. The air that came out was dry, preserved, protected. Inside lay 4 items arranged with deliberate care. A leather-bound journal, edges worn but intact. Zoning permits dated 20 years back, each stamped with the Flagstaff City Council seal. 2 heavy accounting ledgers, thick with handwritten numbers and unfamiliar signatures. And at the bottom, a small black microcassette recorder. Eli lifted the journal first. The name signed inside the cover was Martin Hale. He paused. He had heard that name before, a news report years back. Something about a mine collapse. 7 dead. A flurry of blame that never resolved into justice. Ranger growled again, louder this time. Eli's pulse kicked. He crossed the room in 3 quiet steps, crouched beside Ranger, and scanned the shadows. The warehouse held nothing but old pallets and the cold echo of the night wind through broken glass. But Ranger wasn't wrong. The dog's nose was never wrong. Somebody's close. Eli whispered. Ranger pressed forward, teeth bared just enough to show restraint. The kind of posture he had only used around armed men in tight spaces. Eli slipped back to the bench, grabbed everything from the strongbox, and shoved it into his backpack. He didn't take time to repack carefully. The tape, the ledgers, the journal. All of it needed to go. He hesitated only once. He turned off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed the warehouse. Ranger didn't need light. Eli didn't either, not anymore. He let his eyes adjust, let the cold shape of the room sharpen into outlines he knew by heart. He moved toward the exit. Then he heard it. The soft scrape of a boot outside the loading bay. Too slow to be wind. Too heavy to be an animal. Too cautious to be a stranger passing by. Someone was approaching deliberately. Ranger's growl deepened. Low frequency. A sound only a trained dog made when he calculated distance and danger. Eli's first thought was security. But private security didn't stalk buildings quietly. They announced themselves with flashlights and radios. They didn't move like ghosts. That old battlefield instinct flared awake. This isn't random. This isn't patrol. Someone had tracked them here. Eli touched Ranger's flank. The dog instantly stilled, waiting for a command. "We're leaving, buddy, now!" The shepherd moved to the side exit without a whisper of sound. Eli followed, his backpack heavy against his shoulder, the weight of the strongbox's secrets suddenly dangerous. He pressed one hand to the metal door, listening. Silence. Too much silence. He opened the door an inch. The night outside was black and still. Ranger slipped through first, scanning the alley. Eli stepped out behind him, closing the door without a sound. They didn't look back. They didn't breathe deeply until they had crossed 2 empty lots and disappeared into the maze of industrial buildings. Only then, under a flickering street lamp, did Eli let the truth settle in. Someone knew about the storage unit, someone wanted the box, and now they wanted him. Ranger nudged his hand, urging him onward. His eyes burned with purpose. Eli tightened his grip on the backpack. Whatever was inside that strongbox had just changed everything. Mara Quinn lived in a cramped second-floor apartment above a cafe that roasted its beans at sunrise. At this hour, before dawn had even hinted at the horizon, the street was empty, except for the glow of a single porch light and the quiet scrape of Eli Turner's boots on the steps. Ranger padded beside him, every sense alert. Eli hesitated before knocking. Years had passed since he last saw Mara. Back then, she had been a young reporter embedded with his unit for a short, chaotic stretch. He had dragged her out of a blown-out building when an IED collapsed the stairwell beneath her. They had not spoken since he left the military. He doubted she expected to open her door to the ghost of the man she remembered. He knocked anyway. The locks clicked. The door opened an inch. Mara's face appeared in the narrow gap, half lit by the dim hallway lamp. Eli? Her voice carried disbelief, then shock as she opened the door fully. She took in his coat, stiff from winter nights, the dirt smudged across his face, the torn backpack slung over his shoulder. Her expression wavered between recognition and something sharper. Grief, maybe. Pity he did not want. "You look like hell," she whispered. "Been a long road." Ranger stepped forward, placing himself subtly between them, as if reminding the world who he answered to. Mara's eyes softened at the sight of him. "And you still have a partner?" "Yeah. He keeps me alive." She stepped back to let them in. The warmth of the apartment hit Eli like a soft punch. He wasn't used to closed spaces anymore. Ranger sniffed every corner before settling near the table. "What happened to you?" Mara asked. Eli opened his backpack without answering. He took out the leather journal first, the tape recorder next. And when the ledgers hit the table, Mara inhaled sharply. "Where did you get these?" "Storage auction." Ranger found a false wall. She flipped open the journal. The ink was faded but legible. Martin Hale's handwriting filled every page. Technical notes, locations, meetings, warnings that no one had listened to. Mara stopped on a date. April 12th, 1999. "The Hale mine collapse," she said quietly. Eli had expected her to skim. Instead, she sat down hard, the weight of memory slamming into her. Her hand trembled as she traced a line of text. 7 men died that day. I covered the memorial 20 years later. They said it was an accident. She closed the journal. But Hale didn't think so. And this proves it. She picked up the zoning permits next. The seals, the signatures, some photocopied, some altered, some too perfect. These were tampered with. "That's what I figured," Eli said. She reached for the tape recorder. The plastic crackled in her hands. She hit play. Static hissed, punctured by muffled voices underneath. Nothing intelligible. The tapes degraded. "We need a forensic cleanup. I know someone who can try," she said. Ranger lifted his head suddenly. His body stiffened, eyes fixed on the window. Mara froze. "What is it?" "He hears something," Eli said. Ranger moved to the edge of the curtain, nose pressed to the glass. His chest rumbled. A warning. A measured threat. Eli stepped beside him and peeked outside. A black SUV was parked on the opposite side of the street. No lights, no movement. But the engine was running, a faint vibration spreading across the cold air. The windows were tinted too dark for Arizona law. "That yours?" Eli asked quietly. Mara shook her head. The feeling he had ignored earlier slammed back into him with full force. Someone had tracked them. Someone who knew what the strongbox contained. "Grab your laptop and whatever you need," Eli said. "We're leaving now." "What? Why? Who are they?" "Don't know. Don't want to find out while they're still parked." Ranger growled once. Not loud, deep. A tactical growl that said the SUV was not alone. Mara's breath hitched. Eli slung the backpack over his shoulder. Ranger moved to the door, already choosing their exit path. Eli opened the door carefully, checking the hallway. "Follow us. No noise." Mara obeyed. Ranger led them down the stairs, pausing twice to listen, then pushed through the back exit into the alley. The air was razor cold. Frost glimmered across the dumpsters and cracked asphalt. "They're watching my apartment," Mara whispered. "They're watching the journal," Eli corrected. He guided her through a narrow corridor between 2 supply stores. Ranger moved ahead, sniffing the ground, tracking the subtle pressure of tires and the scent of engine oil drifting on the breeze. Eli recognized the oil type. Synthetic blend used by private contractors who worked in remote areas, not civilians. They reached a chain-link fence at the end of the alley. Ranger slipped beneath a gap at the bottom. Eli pulled it up for Mara to crawl through. Once on the other side, they plunged deeper into the industrial stretches of old Flagstaff. "Where are we going?" Mara asked between breaths. "Old service tunnels under the textile district," Eli said. "Most people forgot they're still there. We'll lose them." Ranger trotted ahead, checking every intersection, every shadow. His posture was controlled but urgent. He paused occasionally, nose lifted toward the wind. Each time, he changed direction quickly, leading them into the maze of abandoned loading docks and cinder block corridors. Mara watched him with wide eyes. He moves like he knows this place better than we do. He knows danger better than any of us. Eli said. When they reached a rusted metal hatch half buried behind an old warehouse, Ranger pawed at it twice and looked back at Eli. "This one, huh?" Ranger barked once. Eli pulled the hatch open. A draft of cold air rose, carrying the smell of dust and stone. The tunnel stretched into darkness beneath the city. "Get in," Eli ordered. Mara hesitated only a second before climbing down. Ranger followed, landing silently on the concrete floor below. Eli dropped in last and pulled the hatch closed above them. Darkness swallowed everything. Then Ranger pressed his shoulder against Eli's leg, guiding him forward with the steady confidence of a trained K9 working in pitch black. They walked for 10 minutes before Eli spoke again. Someone knew about that storage unit. Someone knew exactly what was hidden there. And they're coming for it. Mara's voice trembled. "What do they want?" Eli didn't answer immediately. He looked down at Ranger, whose eyes reflected faint glints of tunnel light. Ranger was calm, focused, a soldier again. "Whatever this is," Eli said quietly, "it didn't die in 1999, and neither did the people who covered it up." Ranger stopped suddenly. His ears shot upward, his body locked. Not fear, a signal. Someone was already in the tunnel. Eli's pulse hammered once, cold and sharp. Run! Aidan Brooks lived at the edge of town in a squat brick building, wedged between a pawn shop and an auto glass repair shop. The sign above his door still read, "Brooks Radio Service," though everyone in Flagstaff knew he handled far more than broken CB sets. Before he walked away from the bureau, Aidan had been the man agents called when a recording could make or break a case. Now he preferred the quiet work, the tinkering, the static. He opened the door before Mara even knocked. His eyes flicked from her to Eli to Ranger. The shepherd's posture made him lift a brow. "You brought company. We need your help," Mara said. Aidan stepped aside. Ranger entered first, sweeping the small workshop with the soldier's precision before settling near the far table. Only then did Eli and Mara follow. Aidan noticed the tension immediately. He gestured toward a workbench cluttered with wires, solder, and half-disassembled radios. "Put it here." Eli set the microcassette recorder on the table. Aidan leaned close, listening to a few seconds. His expression tightened. Old tape. Damaged, but not hopeless. "Can you fix it?" Mara asked. "I can try, just don't breathe on me while I work." He slipped on a headset, connected the device to a specialized reader, and started cycling through filters. Static filled the room, rising and falling like distant wind. While he worked, Mara opened her laptop to the scans of the zoning permits. Eli stood at the window with Ranger, both watching the street with equal intensity. Aidan's fingers moved steadily across the controls. He isolated sound bands, stripped interference, slowed the tape. Suddenly he froze. "Got something." Eli stepped closer. A voice emerged through the noise. Deep, controlled, confident. Aidan pushed the gain higher. Words sharpened out of the murk. "Martin is becoming a problem." Another voice responded, nervous, softer. He filed the reports. They could trigger an investigation. The first voice returned. "Then we handle him. Quietly. Before he talks." Mara's breath caught. "That's Victor Dane." Eli felt the name hit him like a physical blow. Dane Industrial was one of the largest employers in northern Arizona. Their name was stamped on construction sites, water treatment projects, municipal contracts. Aidan adjusted the filter again. More voices slipped through, faint but chilling. "If the council learns about the spill, we lose the whole expansion. Take care of Hale. Tonight." The tape ended abruptly in a harsh click. Mara looked at Eli, face pale. "This isn't just corruption. This is murder." Eli didn't respond. He was staring at Ranger, whose ears had suddenly snapped upright. The shepherd stalked forward, nose working the air, body coiled like a spring. Aidan frowned. "What's wrong with him?" Eli didn't answer. Ranger moved toward Mara's open bag on the floor. He sniffed once, then let out a deep, violent growl. The kind he used only when explosives or hidden threats were close. Eli stepped to his side. Ranger shoved his nose against the outer pocket of the bag, then pulled back sharply, paw striking the fabric. Mara blinked. "What is it?" Eli knelt, unzipped the pocket and reached inside. "Leave it." Ranger growled, pushing Eli's arm away with his muzzle. Eli stopped. That growl wasn't fear. It was warning. He lifted the bag carefully and tipped it upside down on the table. Aidan swore as a small black device clattered out. "That's a tracker," he said. "Military grade. High frequency. Not something you buy at a hardware store." Mara staggered back. "Someone put that in my bag?" "Not someone," Eli said. "They did it at your apartment, while we were inside." His voice was flat, stripped of surprise. Ranger paced once, nose pointed toward the door. Eli smelled it seconds later. Oil. Not the type used by local trucks or street mechanics. A thicker blend. Tactical. Something used by teams that drove modified engines. Aidan caught the look in Eli's eyes. "What is it?" "They're here," Eli said. "The mercenary type. Dane must have sent them when the box went missing." Mara's voice tightened. "You mean Victor Dane knows we have this?" "He knew the moment we opened that panel," Eli said. "This wasn't random. He's been watching that storage unit for years." The light outside shifted. Ranger growled again. Eli crossed to the window, staying low. A black SUV turned onto the street, rolling slowly past the pawn shop. The same kind from Mara's apartment. Aidan cursed. "You said they didn't see you come here." "They didn't," Eli said, "but they tracked her, and now they're sweeping the area until the signal pings." Then the device on the table blinked once. A faint red light. Aidan's eyes widened. "They've already got a lock." Ranger barked sharply. "Not loud! Commanding!" Eli reacted instantly. "We're leaving out the back. Now!" Aidan grabbed the tape and the recorder. Mara snatched the journal. Ranger moved to the exit before Eli even reached for the handle. He pushed the door open with his head, scanning the alley. Mara whispered, "Can't we call the police?" Eli shook his head. "If Dane owns council permits, he owns someone in law enforcement. We can't trust anyone until we know who they bought." Ranger huffed once as if agreeing. They stepped into the alley as shadows moved at the end of the block. Ranger led them into a narrow passage between buildings, picking the safest line through debris without hesitation. His ears never stopped shifting, his pace never faltered. Mara watched him with awe. He knows the safest path. "He always does," Eli said, when they reached an old drainage ditch behind the auto shops. Ranger froze again. Not fear, calculation. He turned abruptly and headed north, choosing a route Eli recognized. The abandoned rail yard, a good place to lose a tail. As they moved through the skeletal remains of rail lines and rusted freight cars, Eli glanced back at the street. The SUV had stopped. Two figures stood outside it, scanning the area with deliberate patience. Not cops, not amateurs. Dane's men. And they were closing in. Ranger quickened his pace, leading them deeper into the maze of metal and shadows. Eli followed without question. They were no longer running from danger. They were running toward the truth, and Ranger was clearing the path one instinct at a time. Snow came in the early hours before dawn, drifting across Flagstaff in thin, wind-cutting sheets that covered footprints and hid danger. Eli, Mara, and Ranger reached Aidan's building just as the sun threatened the horizon. The place looked normal at first glance, the faded sign still hanging above the door, the windows still dark. But Ranger stopped 10 yards back, body rigid. Eli followed the dog's stare. The door hung slightly open. Aidan never left it open, not for anyone. Eli whispered, "Stay close." Mara nodded, trembling. Ranger lowered himself, shoulders tight, muzzle pointing straight ahead. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply listened. Eli had seen that posture before in Afghanistan, moments before a breach into a hostile room. Inside, the radio shop was silent. Aidan's tables were overturned, tools scattered across the floor. A soldering iron lay on its side, burned deep into the wood. The cassette deck was missing. The drawers where Aidan kept his backup equipment were emptied. The smell hit Eli next. Not blood, not fear. Gunpowder. He stepped inside, Ranger glued to his leg. Mara slipped behind them, hand over her mouth. "Aidan?" she whispered. No answer. They scanned the back hallway, moving with the practiced rhythm of soldiers and dogs who had done this before. The last door at the end was open. Inside, Aidan's office had been bulldozed by men searching for something specific. Filing cabinets torn open, floorboards pried up, safe cracked. But Aidan himself was gone. Eli exhaled slowly. They took him alive. Mara leaned against the ruined wall. "This is Dane. He's tying up every loose end." Eli was about to respond when Ranger suddenly snapped his head towards the window. His ears sharpened, his body coiled. Then he lunged, ramming Eli sideways with surprising force. A bullet shattered the window a second later. "Get down!" Eli pulled Mara to the floor. Ranger stood between them and the broken glass, snarling low. More shots tore through the frame, ripping across the shelves. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to scare them. They were trying to erase the last 3 witnesses left. Eli peeked through a crack in the wall. 3 men, black jackets, suppressors on their rifles, moving with coordination that told him they had done this a dozen times. "They're sweeping the building," Eli whispered. "We're boxed in." Mara's voice was thin. "Then what do we do?" Before Eli could answer, the front door exploded inward. Wood splintered. Ranger spun and lunged at Mara again, forcing her flat right as a bullet sliced across the space where her head had been. She cried out in shock. Ranger barked once, a command bark, sharp and deep, and Eli understood. They needed to move. Now! He grabbed Mara's arm and sprinted toward the kitchen area at the back of the building. Ranger raced ahead, checking corners faster than Eli could blink. They reached the back exit just as another burst of gunfire tore through the room. They had been in seconds earlier. When Eli shoved the door open, a shadow moved to their right. One of the mercenaries had circled behind the building. He fired. Ranger leapt. The bullet meant for Mara hit Ranger's shoulder and spun him sideways in the air. He crashed into the dirt with a desperate yelp. Mara screamed. Eli lunged toward the dog, sliding into the snow beside him. Ranger tried to stand but collapsed, teeth clenched to stop his own cry. Blood soaked into the white ground, turning it dark. Eli felt something inside him tear open. Ranger had saved them again. Despite exhaustion, despite pain, despite everything. The mercenary stepped forward to finish them. Eli reacted without thinking. Years of muscle memory kicked in. He tackled the man at the knees, the rifle skidding across the ice. They grappled, fists cracking into flesh, boots scrabbling on the frozen concrete. Eli slammed the man into the wall and knocked him out cold. He scrambled back to Ranger. The shepherd tried to rise again, staggering, but Eli forced him down gently. "Easy. Stay with me." Mara knelt beside them, tears streaking down her face. "He's losing blood." Eli's hands shook. "We need a vet hospital." Mara stared at him. "Eli, if we go to a hospital, Dane's people will be there in minutes. They'll take the dog. They'll take us. We can't..." He cut her off. He needs medical care. He's dying. Ranger lifted his head and pressed his muzzle against Eli's hand. His eyes were sharp despite the pain, locked on Eli with a message clearer than speech. No surrender. He pushed at Eli's chest with his paw, weak but insistent. When Eli tried to lift him, Ranger growled, a painful, warning sound. Eli froze. The dog wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid Eli would give up. Eli swallowed hard. The cold air stung his lungs. For a moment he saw the war again. Men he'd lost, promises he'd broken, moments where surrender would have been easier than survival. Ranger nudged him again. Mara whispered, "He doesn't want you to quit." Eli closed his eyes. He felt the weight of everything he'd tried to carry alone. The storage unit, the tape, the journal, Aiden's disappearance, Mara's fear, Ranger's blood on his hands. If I walk into a hospital, Dane wins. He silences the truth. He erases everyone who tried to speak it. And he takes the one thing I have left. Ranger made a low sound, as if agreeing. Mara wiped her face. Then what now? Eli looked at Ranger. The dog stared back with unwavering resolve despite the shaking in his limbs. "We don't go to a hospital," Eli said. "Not yet." Mara's eyes widened. "Then where? Somewhere Dane won't expect. Somewhere we can treat him without being found." Ranger lowered his head to the snow, but kept his gaze fixed on Eli. He trusted him completely, even in agony, even bleeding. Eli lifted Ranger in his arms. The shepherd whimpered once, but not from fear, from determination. "We finish what we started," Eli whispered. "For Aiden, for Martin Hale, and for you." They moved into the alley, disappearing into the storm. Eli felt it with every step. They were at the crossroads. Walk away, and Ranger's sacrifice meant nothing. Push forward, and they might all die. But surrender was no longer an option. Ranger had made sure of that. The storm eased by the time they reached the abandoned textile mill on the south edge of Flagstaff. The place had been dead for 20 years, a graveyard of machinery and flaking steel. It was the only spot Eli trusted enough to hide in while Ranger healed. He wrapped the shepherd's shoulder, cleaned the wound, and kept pressure steady. Ranger tolerated it with clenched teeth, refusing to whimper. Mara paced near the rusted conveyor belts, phone pressed against her ear. "Aiden, are you alive? Answer me." A faint click finally sounded from her speaker. Static crackled, then Aiden's voice came through, shaky but breathing. "I'm here. They didn't kill me. Yet." Eli moved closer. "Aiden, what did they take from you?" "Not the tape," Aiden said. "I swapped the reels the second I heard them at the door. They think they stole the original. They didn't." Mara gasped. "You still have it?" "I have more than that. I recovered the full recording." Eli's shoulders tightened. "What's on it?" Aiden took a long, painful breath. "Everything. The entire boardroom conversation, the bribes, the environmental spill cover-up, and the order to eliminate Martin Hale." Mara exchanged a stunned look with Eli. "All of it? How?" Aiden's voice wavered. Hale must have known they were onto him. He built a second recorder into the wall. It kept running after the first was destroyed. Eli felt the air shift. Dane had no idea the real evidence still existed. "Play it, Aiden," Mara said. He did. The room filled with voices cold enough to chill bone. Victor Dane's voice dominated the recording. He spoke casually about the chemical leaks near the Hale mine. He named the city council members he paid off. He described the consequences if Hale refused to cooperate. Then came the final piece, the one no one had heard clearly before. "Sheriff Lucas will handle the removal. He's discreet. He knows what's at stake. Tell him it has to look like an accident. Tonight." Mara's knees almost buckled. "The sheriff? Our sheriff?" Eli felt the world harden around him. Lucas controlled patrol routes, dispatch lines, and the entire reporting chain for major crimes. If he was in on the murder, they had no allies left in the city. Ranger suddenly rose despite the pain, ears snapping upward like a switch had been thrown. He looked toward the far end of the warehouse. "Someone's here," Eli whispered. Ranger limped forward, muscles shaking, but his posture was pure steel. Aiden's voice grew frantic. "I forgot to tell you, Lucas is tracking every abandoned structure in the district. He knows the old mill is where vagrants hide. He'll sweep it." Too late. Headlights spilled into the broken loading bay, cutting through dust. Boots hit the concrete. Shadows slid between the rusted skeletons of machines. "Move!" Eli shouted. Mara grabbed the journal and the tape. Ranger took point, limping but alert, guiding them through a maze of broken catwalks toward the far exit. Gunfire erupted behind them. Metal shrieked as bullets ricocheted off pipes. Ranger barked once, a sharp command, and Eli ducked left, weaving behind a collapsed ventilation unit. They reached the back hall, a narrow corridor lined with stacks of discarded pallets. Ranger paused long enough to sniff the air, then shot forward, limping faster than Mara could run. He stopped at a side door and shoved his weight against it. "This way," Eli said. They burst into a storage yard filled with scrap metal, rusted dumpsters, and half-crushed cars. The moonlight made everything look like twisted bones. Shadows moved behind them. The mercenaries were fanning out. Ranger limped to the head of a narrow path between two heaps of crushed vehicles. He turned back to Eli, eyes sharp despite the pain. "Follow me." Eli understood without words. Mara trailed behind, clutching the evidence like a lifeline. The mercenaries closed in, firing in short, precise bursts meant to funnel them toward the fence. Eli grabbed a heavy metal rod from the ground and hurled it at the nearest shooter. It clanged off a pipe, forcing the man to flinch. Eli tackled another from behind, driving him into the dirt before wrestling the rifle free. Shots ripped across the scrapyard. Eli fired back, hitting one of the oil-coated engines behind the attackers. Flames burst upward, forcing them to scatter. Mara ducked behind an overturned forklift. Ranger stood beside her, snarling with deadly focus. His injured leg shook, but he refused to fall. Eli met them at the forklift. "The fence is ahead. We blast through it or we die here." The mercenaries regrouped for a final push. The sheriff himself stepped into view, rifle in hand, face stone cold. His voice cut across the yard. "Turn over the tape. You walk away alive. That dog dies either way." Ranger growled, deep and low. Eli felt something old ignite in him. Something forged in war, buried in shame, now rising because that dog refused to let him surrender. "You already killed one innocent man," Eli shouted back. "You're not taking another?" Lucas raised his rifle. "End of the line." And then something unexpected happened. A loud metallic clank echoed through the yard. The side gate rolled open on its rusty track. A black pickup truck idled on the street outside, engine humming. A tall figure leaned out of the driver's window. "Get in if you want to live." It was Ethan Dane. Mara gasped. "Victor's son?" Ethan's eyes flicked toward the sheriff. "You don't know what he did to Hale, or what he did to me when I tried to speak up. I'm done being silent." Lucas cursed. "Ethan, you open that gate and you die with them." Too late. Ethan had already unlocked the outer fence. Ranger barked, urging Eli to move. Eli grabbed Mara's wrist. "Now!" They sprinted across the yard. Bullets tore through the air. Ranger stayed beside them, limping but refusing to fall behind. Eli dove into the truck bed first, pulling Ranger in with him. Mara slid into the cab next to Ethan. "Drive!" Eli yelled. Ethan slammed the gas pedal. The truck fishtailed on the ice, then roared into the street. Lucas and his mercenaries poured through the gate, firing wildly as Ethan turned into the night. Ethan's jaw clenched. "My father thinks he owns this city. Tonight, we change that." Ranger collapsed beside Eli, breathing hard but alive. Eli pressed a hand to the shepherd's neck. "We're going to finish this, I promise." Behind them, the mill burned, flames rising like a beacon. Ahead lay the truth, the danger, and the final confrontation. And for the first time since the storage unit door creaked open, Eli felt the tide turning. Ranger had led them through fire. Now he would lead them into the light. The Flagstaff Civic Center had never seen a crowd like this. News vans packed the street outside. Cameramen lined the steps. Protesters held cardboard signs demanding justice for Martin Hale. Inside, a public hearing room meant for zoning disputes now felt like the front lines of a political storm. At the center of the room sat Eli Turner, shoulders squared but eyes steady. Beside him, lying on a padded mat Mara had begged the clerk to allow, was Ranger. His shoulder was still wrapped in clean bandages, one ear twitching toward every new noise. He wasn't fully healed, but he refused to stay behind. Eli knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. The dog had earned his place here. Mara stood at the podium, flipping through exhibits, her voice steady but electric with purpose. Aidan, still bruised but alive, sat behind her with the repaired tape recorder resting on a velvet cloth like some sacred relic. And beside them, adjusting her blazer with calm precision, was Chloe Park. Chloe was one of those lawyers the city talked about in hushed admiration. Public interest cases were her territory. She'd taken on pharmaceutical giants, corrupt city boards, and predatory developers. She wasn't afraid of power. She never had been. When she shook Eli's hand earlier, her grip was firm, and her words were simple. "Thank you for surviving long enough to bring this in." The hearing began. Members of the Oversight Council sat at the bench. Faces tight as documents, photos and recordings were submitted. Chloe guided them piece by piece, laying out a chain of corruption that spanned more than a decade. Zoning permits altered under false signatures, environmental reports hidden, bribes disguised as consultant fees. And then, the tape. Aidan pressed play. Victor Dane's voice filled the room. Every word from the secret meeting. Every admission. Every order. The part naming Sheriff Lucas as the one who would arrange Martin Hale's disappearance landed like a punch to the gut. People in the audience gasped. One woman covered her mouth. A councilman dropped his pen. Even the stenographer paused her typing, stunned. When the tape ended, silence held the room in a vice. Chloe stepped forward. "Members of the council, this is not negligence. This is criminal conspiracy. This is the orchestration of a man's death to protect profit. And this is the betrayal of every citizen in this city." She turned slightly, gesturing to the front row. "Sheriff Lucas, please stand." Lucas, flanked by two officers from the State Inspector General's office, stood with a jaw stiff enough to crack. His badge had been taken hours earlier. His rights had been read in front of half the department. Now he faced the council's glare as another officer cuffed his wrists. Obstruction of justice, bribery, conspiracy to commit homicide. The charges echoed across the wood-paneled room. Ranger let out a low, satisfied huff, as though he understood. Then Victor Dane himself was escorted in. The once untouchable industrial magnate looked smaller now, boxed in by two federal marshals. His suit still sharp, his hair still perfectly combed, but his face held the tightness of a man who finally realized the walls he built for others had closed around him. Chloe didn't look at him. Instead, she focused on the next witness. Ethan Dane. He walked toward the stand with shoulders squared, uncertainty tugging at him, but his voice didn't shake when he was sworn in. Up close, you could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Not guilt, not fear. Something else. The weight of choosing truth over blood. Chloe approached him gently. "Mr. Dane, you requested to testify against your father. Why?" Ethan swallowed. Because I knew what he did to Martin Hale. I saw the second set of ledgers. I knew he paid Lucas to cover up the environmental spill that killed those workers in '99, and I knew that if he'd kill once, he'd kill again. He almost had them killed too. He pointed toward Eli and Ranger. He's not sick or old or confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. Victor Dane's jaw locked. Ethan didn't flinch. The room erupted in murmurs. The council asked 3 more questions. Ethan answered all of them with clarity and a hint of pain. For the first time, it felt like the truth had a fighting chance. When he stepped down, he glanced at Eli. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "For all of it." Eli nodded once. Ranger let out a small breath, almost like acceptance. The council retreated to deliberate. Half an hour later, they returned. All recommendations passed unanimously. Victor Dane would face federal prosecution, Sheriff Lucas would be removed and charged, Dane Industrial would be stripped of its contracts pending a full investigation, and the city would reopen the Hale mine case as a wrongful death homicide. Outside, the crowd exploded in applause. Inside, Eli finally let himself breathe. Mara threw her arms around him. Aidan grunted something like relief. Chloe tucked her files into a bag. Her usually cool expression softened by triumph. Ranger wagged his tail once, slow but proud. He pressed his head against Eli's leg, eyes warm and tired, as if saying, "We made it." A local reporter approached. "Sir, is it true the dog helped uncover the evidence?" Eli looked down at Ranger, who lifted his chin with regal calm. "He didn't just help," Eli said. "He got us here. If he hadn't pushed me, warned me, dragged me out of danger, none of this would have seen the light." Ranger leaned into him again. The bandage on his shoulder shifted, but he didn't flinch. Eli's voice softened. He carried the truth when the rest of us were hanging by a thread. Flashbulbs burst, capturing the image of a battered veteran and his wounded shepherd standing together before a city that didn't know it owed them everything. Justice wasn't finished. But the tide had turned. And for the first time in years, Eli felt something warm push through the cold that had followed him home from war. Hope. 3 weeks after the hearing, Flagstaff looked almost unchanged from the outside. Same red brick storefronts, same mountain air rolling down from Humphreys Peak, same morning traffic buzzing along Route 66. But for Eli Turner, everything felt different, as if the city had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too many years. He was no longer sleeping beneath the overpass, no more curling up against a cold concrete pillar with Ranger as his only source of warmth. Instead, Eli stood at the doorway of a small transitional apartment on Birch Avenue. A second-floor walk-up with a view of snow-dusted rooftops, a heater that clattered when it turned on, and a kitchen just big enough for a coffee maker Mara insisted on buying him. It wasn't much, but it was clean. It was warm. And it was his. Ranger padded out from the bedroom, tail waving lazily. The shepherd walked with his usual grounded confidence, but Eli could still see the shaved patch on his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. The stitches were gone, the wound closed, but the faint scar would remain. A mark of the night everything almost collapsed. A mark of the night Ranger refused to let him quit. Eli knelt, scratching under the dog's chin. "You earned that scar, buddy. That one stays." Ranger gave a soft chuff in response, leaning into his hand. For a moment, the room felt full, warm in a way Eli hadn't experienced since before Afghanistan, before everything unraveled. A knock came at the door. Mara stepped in without waiting for him to answer, holding 2 large paper bags from a local grocery store. Her coat looked too thin for the cold, but her energy filled the room. "Food," she announced. "Actual food. Not canned beans, not gas station noodles. Vegetables, Turner. You're joining the living." Eli shook his head. smiling in the quiet, tired way of someone who still couldn't quite accept kindness without feeling off balance. "You don't need to keep doing this, Mara." She ignored the comment and set the bags on the counter. Ranger trotted over, sniffing curiously, then circled back to Eli's side like he was checking to make sure the moment wasn't a dream. Mara finally turned, leaning against the counter. "How's he healing?" Eli looked down at Ranger. "Better than I am." Ranger nudged his leg, as if objecting to the comment. Mara's face softened. "I meant what I said earlier. You two saved this city from burying another truth. People know it. They see you differently now." Eli shifted uneasily. Attention still felt like danger. In his world, visibility had never been safety. He walked to the window instead. Outside, the street was quiet. Kids played in fresh snow across the block. A mail truck crawled along the curb. Life, simple and ordinary, went on. Eli let the silence settle before he spoke. "I spent 4 years coming back from a war that didn't end for me. Thought it never would. Thought I'd just fade out somewhere under a bridge. Then this bin, that box. I don't know why it landed in my hands. But it felt like someone pushing me back into the world." Mara stepped closer, her voice calm. "Maybe it wasn't someone. Maybe it was something in you that wasn't done fighting." Eli didn't answer, but his eyes lowered to Ranger. The dog met his gaze with the same unwavering certainty he had shown the night Eli wanted to surrender. The same certainty he had shown every time Eli started slipping back into the dark. Ranger stretched once, then rested his head on Eli's knee. Solid, anchored. A soft knock pulled their attention again. Aidan Brooks stuck his head into the apartment, holding a small envelope and smelling faintly of solder and radio tubes. "Mail was downstairs," he said. "Figured you'd want this one. Came with a city seal." He tossed the envelope to Eli and left without fanfare, muttering something about an old ham radio tower he needed to fix. Eli hesitated before opening it. Ranger shifted, sensing tension. Mara leaned in. Inside was a letter from the city council, thanking him for his role in the investigation, with a small stipend attached from the whistleblower fund. Not enough to change his life, but enough to help him stand on his feet. He stared at the check longer than necessary. Mara smiled. "That look on your face right now? That's the look of a man who's allowed to start over." Eli folded the paper and placed it gently on the table. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a shadow moving through the world. He didn't feel like a worn-down soldier drifting toward an ending he hadn't chosen. He felt present. Ranger, picking up on the shift in him, let out a low, pleased sound before stretching his neck, nudging Eli's hand upward as if insisting he keep going, keep moving forward. A simple gesture. But for Eli, it was everything. He looked at the apartment, at Mara's grocery bags, at the check on the table, at the dog who had followed him through shadows no one else could see. For the first time since he returned home from war, Eli Turner stood in a room that felt like a beginning, not an aftermath. Ranger settled at his feet, scar visible, eyes bright. A warrior, healed but not diminished. And for the first time, Eli felt like he was healing too. The vote took less than 10 minutes. One motion, 1 second, one unanimous decision. North Ridge Storage Yard, the blighted stretch of concrete and rusted roll-up doors where Eli had once slept under an overpass beam, was officially being transferred to the city's redevelopment trust. It would no longer be a dumping ground for forgotten containers or a hideout for the lost. It would become something new. And the first name the council nominated to oversee the transformation was Eli Turner. He sat at the back of the council chamber that morning, a clean jacket over his shoulders, Ranger lying at his boots. Mara stood at the podium, steady as ever, explaining her proposal with crisp conviction. "Flagstaff owes this man more than gratitude," she said. We owe him the chance to rebuild a place that failed him and others like him. Give North Ridge to someone who understands survival, community, and what it means to start from nothing. Give it to the man who turned truth into justice when we couldn't. Eli shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under the weight of her praise. Ranger nudged his boot, sensing the tension. Always sensing it. A councilwoman adjusted her glasses. Ms. Quinn, you're recommending Mr. Turner for an official city role? Not recommending, Mara said, insisting. Eli looked down at Ranger again. The shepherd's eyes were calm, unwavering, as if telling him he had earned this moment, earned a place in the world again. After the vote, council members came to shake his hand. Some thanked him. Some apologized. Most stared at Ranger first, then at Eli, as if realizing the dog had been as much a warrior as the man. Outside, the winter sun hit his face, bright but gentle, the kind of sunlight that made the city glow instead of burn. Mara elbowed him lightly. Supervisor Turner. Has a ring to it, doesn't it? He huffed a small laugh. Feels strange. It's supposed to, she said. New things always do. Ranger sat at Eli's side, chest puffed slightly, as if he understood the promotion applied to him too. They walked together toward North Ridge. The yard looked different in daylight. Less grim, more full of possibility. Rows of abandoned units stood like silent witnesses to the years Eli had lived among them, sleeping under tarps, sharing scraps with Ranger, hiding from a world that didn't know what to do with broken soldiers. Now, orange markers flagged the edges of the lot. Survey teams had started mapping soil conditions. Engineers walked the perimeter taking notes. The air buzzed with a sense of anticipation. Eli stood in the middle of it all, his new territory, his new mission. By spring, demolition crews had taken down the unstable structures. Eli worked beside them, boots in the dirt, instructing workers where to reinforce and where to dig. He learned permit language. He learned budgeting. He learned how to talk to architects who dreamed in blueprints instead of battlegrounds. But the most important design choice was his own, North Ridge Community Center. And to the right of the main building, the K9 Support Wing, a place for dogs like Ranger, for rescues, for retired K9 units, for animals whose loyalty had once saved lives and whose futures often became uncertain once their working years ended. The city council supported it instantly. Donors stepped in. A local construction firm offered reduced rates. A therapy non-profit partnered with Mara to run programs. When the sign went up, Eli stood beneath it with Ranger at his side. North Ridge Community Center Veteran Outreach, Job Training, Housing Support, K9 Companionship and Service Training Wing, in honor of Martin Hale and all those who were silenced. His throat tightened. He placed his hand on Ranger's neck, feeling the warmth of the dog's steady presence grounding him. Day by day, the compound grew. Fresh lumber replaced rusted beams. Windows let in sunlight where there had once been only shadows. Painted lines marked paths where Eli used to walk alone in the dark. And Ranger, scarred, dignified, unshakable, became the center's unofficial heart. Veterans visited to help with training exercises. Some arrived with hands that shook. Some spoke in short fragments, unable to articulate their memories. Ranger approached each one gently, sensing exactly how close to get, when to sit, when to lean in, when to simply exist beside them. One former Marine broke down the first time Ranger rested his head in his lap. He hasn't let anyone touch him in months, Mara whispered to Eli afterward. Ranger walked away slowly, as if giving the man space to breathe again. Another veteran, a woman who rarely met anyone's eyes, found herself smiling the first time Ranger trotted to her with a toy rope in his mouth. She threw it once, then again, then stayed an hour longer than she planned. Therapists took notes. Eli watched it happen. This dog wasn't just healing from a wound. He was healing others. Before long, people from the neighborhood started visiting. Kids from the apartment complexes nearby came to read books in the courtyard. A local baker donated biscuits for both humans and dogs. A retired carpenter volunteered to build benches. One morning, Eli arrived early and found Ranger lying quietly beside a young veteran sitting on the ground, crying into his hands. Ranger didn't move. He didn't push. He simply stayed. When the man finally settled enough to breathe, he whispered, "Thank you," to the dog, not to Eli. Eli understood. The world had been full of noise and violence and loss for so long. But here, in this rebuilt corner of Flagstaff, something different emerged. A legacy. Not born from power or money. Not built on fear or silence. A legacy formed by a homeless veteran who thought his story was over, and a German shepherd who refused to let him disappear. As the sun dipped behind the mountains and the construction site quieted, Eli walked the perimeter one last time. Ranger trotted beside him, tail low, posture relaxed. "This is good," Eli murmured. "Really good." Ranger nudged his hand. They reached the edge of the yard where Eli used to sleep, and for the first time, the memory didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a chapter he had survived. He looked down at Ranger. "You didn't just pull me out of the cold. You gave me something to build." Ranger's eyes reflected the warm glow from the lamplights. Strong, intelligent, loyal. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of dust and pine. Eli breathed it in. The war wasn't gone. The scars weren't erased. But he was no longer a man on the margins, no longer a shadow under the bridge, no longer lost. He was creating a foundation for people like him, with the help of the dog who had never stopped believing he deserved one. The Arizona sun rose early that morning, casting long gold streaks across the red earth. A calm warmth spread over the North Ridge Community Center, landing on fresh concrete, new glass, and the wide courtyard where people were already gathering. Flags flapped lightly. Folding chairs stood in rows. Microphones waited on a small stage. The grand opening had drawn more people than anyone expected. Veterans, families, reporters, city officials, neighbors, children who had grown up hearing rumors of the old storage yard, but had never imagined it would become something like this. And in the front row, sitting with quiet dignity, were the families of the victims of the Hale mine collapse. Some wiped tears, some held hands. Some looked at the new center with the same expression a hiker might give the horizon after climbing a brutal ridge: relief, and a little disbelief that the view was real. Behind them, Ranger lay calmly at Eli's feet, wearing a clean service vest. The scar on his shoulder was visible beneath the fur, a pale line of memory. But the dog held his head high, steady as a stone pillar. When the ceremony began, Mara took the stage first. She spoke about truth reclaimed from the dirt of a forgotten storage bin, about the courage of a man who had once been invisible, about a shepherd who refused to stay silent. Her voice cracked only once, when she turned to face Eli and Ranger. Aidan spoke next, joking that he never expected a broken tape and a cranky radio shop to lead to a citywide reckoning. Chloe Park delivered a short, sharp message about accountability and the power of ordinary people backed into a corner. Then it was Eli's turn. He wasn't used to microphones. His palms felt uncomfortably warm. Ranger pressed against his leg, grounding him. Eli stepped forward. He didn't look like the man who once slept under an overpass. He stood tall now, hair trimmed, shoulders squared, wearing a clean work shirt, with the center's emblem stitched over his heart. "Thank you," he began, voice low but steady, "for being here, for believing in what this place could be, for believing in what it still will become." He looked at the Hale families. None of this fixes what you lost, but today, the truth finally stands where lies used to live. This center exists because your loved ones deserved better, and because one engineer tried to protect this town when no one listened. Eli paused. Martin Hale wasn't a soldier, but he fought a war anyway. Soft murmurs, nods. Then Eli looked down at Ranger. But I didn't fight mine alone. Ranger raised his head, golden eyes narrowing in focus, as if he understood every word. A reporter near the front lifted his hand. Sergeant Turner, why did you keep Ranger with you through everything? Through the chase, the danger, the nights in the cold. All of it? Eli glanced at the microphone, then at the dog who had never once left his side. His palm rested on Ranger's head. He didn't just track the truth, he tracked the part of me I thought was gone. And somehow, he saved me too. The words settled over the crowd like dust over quiet desert ground. Soft, honest, heavy with meaning. Ranger looked up at him then, tail sweeping once across the stage floor. A single slow motion, a gesture only Eli fully understood. Eli turned back to the cameras. What's your story with a loyal pet? Silence. And then applause spread through the courtyard, not explosive but warm, growing like a rising tide. Reporters snapped photos of Ranger, sitting proud beside Eli. Volunteers rolled open the doors to the new K9 support wing. Children rushed to pet the dogs waiting inside. Veterans stepped aside to share quiet words with Eli. Others simply shook his hand. The wind shifted across the desert. Warm, dry, carrying the scent of creosote and red clay. Ranger turned his head toward the open stretch beyond the storage yard, ears pricking at some distant sound or instinct only he could read. Eli followed his gaze. Something out there? Ranger didn't bark, just held the horizon in his eyes, calm yet alert, as if sensing that the world still had another secret tucked under its sand, as if he knew that even when one story ends, another waits to be found. Eli nudged him gently. Come on, partner, we've got people to meet. They stepped down from the stage into the sea of faces, Ranger leading by half a stride, the way he always had. Behind them, the North Ridge Community Center stood tall, sunlight gleaming across its new windows. A place born from a forgotten storage bin. A legacy carried by a man and the dog who refused to leave him behind. And as the cameras kept rolling, Eli spoke once more to the nearest lens, voice soft but clear. If you believe stories like this matter, stories about courage, truth, and the dogs who stand by us, stay with us. Support this channel. Share the journey, because the next tale of loyalty and honor is already waiting. Ranger barked once, sharp and proud, the perfect ending and the perfect beginning.